Okay, so here we have a key in a lock, and I'd like to make it so that whenever the key goes into the lock, the door opens. However, I also have a different key here, and I'd like to make it so whenever that key goes into the lock, the door doesn't open, and if any other pickup objects go into lock, I also want to make sure that those don't open the door. So here's how I go about doing so. First of all, we've got our key, and our key is nothing special, it just has a box collider on it that's set to is trigger, with a rigid body that's disabled gravity and as is kinematic, and then a simple pickup script and a VRC object sync to sync the location of the key. And the red key is no different. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an animation of these doors opening. We're then going to tell the doors to open using some Udon logic. So let's animate the doors. So selecting our doors, I'm just going to select the door manager object itself, and now we need to create an animation for it. So to do that, I'm just going to come up to Window, Animation, Animation, or Control-6 being its shortcut, and I'm just going to park this window down here. Now, making sure that the parent object is selected, we're going to click Create Animation, and I'm going to call this Door Open. Now, I'm going to select one of my doors. Currently, the rotation point is in the middle, so I'm just going to change it from center to pivot. And I set this up in Blender in order to pivot the door from this certain location. But if you're just using the Unity cubes, feel free to look at my video on how to create a lockable door, where I animate it using the default Unity cubes. Anyways, now that I've got that, I'm just going to select my rotate tool, and I'm just going to hit this little record button in order to start recording. I'm then going to hold down Control and just give it a wiggle. And now it's created a node at the 0 position. I'm also going to do that for my other door in order to animate that. And then I'm just going to drag and drop my timeline over to the 1 second mark, and then holding down Control again, I'm going to open up my doors 90 degrees. And with that, we now will have an animation of the door opening. So if I hit play, we can just see the door opening. But there's a slight little tweak I want to do. You can see that the doors are slowing down when they open up fully. So I'm just going to select my final node, and I'm going to click both tangents, and I'm going to set that to linear. This is just to tweak the curve of how they open, which can be kind of useful. If you want to fine tune this, you can always come down into curves here, and you can tweak this however you like. I'm still getting used to this menu, but we can see that it slowly starts to rotate before giving a basically straight line. Awesome! So now we have an animation of the door opening. The next thing I want to do is just create an animation of the door closing so we can do the opposite. So I'm going to come up to this drop down menu that says door opening and go create new clip, and I'm going to call this door close. I'm then going to hit the record button again, and I'm just going to open up my doors so that it starts from the open position. I'm then going to once again drag it across and close my doors as they were at the start of the door open animation. And I'm just going to set these last ones to linear in order to give the same effect. And so now we have an animation of the door closing. So now that we have the animations, we now need to say when we want these animations to play. So first I'm just going to make a slight tweak to our animations. So I'm going to come into the project window, I'm going to select our animations and just disable loop time. This will stop the animations from looping, which is what we want in this case. Okay, so now that we've tweaked our animations, I'm going to come to our door manager, and when we created the animation with this object selected, it created an animator. I've just realized I've still got the recording button going, so I'm just going to disable that and preview. And now I'm just going to double click and open up my animator. So this has just created a new window because I had this open before. And now we see we've got two animations. First of all, we can see that door open is orange with an orange arrow going from entry to door open. And this will mean that this is the default animation that will play. However, we want the door to be closed when we start the game, so I'm just going to select my door close animation, and I'm going to set as layered default state. So now the door close animation will play when the game starts. So we just need a way to transition from door close to door open. To do that, we need a parameter. So I'm going to come up to this tab and click parameters. I'm going to hit this little plus button and create a bool. I'm going to call this bool is open, and we'll use this bool to determine whether or not the door is meant to be open or closed. So now that we have our parameter, we need to create some transitions. So I'm going to right click on door close and go make transition and select door open. And I just want to create a transition the other way. And then I just want to select the first transition. In the inspector, we can see that we have exit time, which we don't want any. This is like a minimum time you want the animation to play, but we want our animation to play instantly if there's been any changes. I then want to disable has exit time just in general, as sometimes just selecting this doesn't actually get rid of exit time, hence why we changed the number. I also want to disable any duration in between the transition. And I also want to make it so that we can interrupt the animation so the door doesn't have to fully open before it can close. To do that, I want to come to interruption source, and I just want to select current state, then next state. And then we want to come down to conditions. So I'm going to hit this little plus button to create a condition. And now we can see the condition is open equals true, as this is the default. So now with this condition, only if is open equals true will it change from door close to door open, which is exactly what we want. So now I just want to copy all this stuff and do it for the other transition. But when I do the condition, when I create the condition, I just want to make it so the condition is that only when is open equals false do I want it to transition from door open to door closed. So now when the game starts, the door closed animation will play, and only when is open equals true will it transition from door closed to door open. Then door open will play, and only when is open equals false will it transition to door closed again. Awesome, so now this is actually a good time to test, so I'm just going to come into my scene and hit play. I'm just going to switch back over to our scene view. I'm going to drag and drop my animator just down here so we can toggle on the animation. And now when we hit the ball is open, we can see that the doors have opened. And when I hit the ball again, we can see that it transitions to the animation door closed, which makes the door close again. Awesome, so now we can stop playtesting. And now all that's left to do is to create some logic on our lock here that changes the is open parameter bool to equal true when the key gets inserted. So let's get started. I'm just going to select my lock here. First of all, it only has a mesh renderer on it, so I just want to go add component, and I'm just going to give it a simple box collider. And I'm going to select is trigger to equal true. Now, a slight correction from like 4 or so videos ago on my trash can video was where I said that one of these objects needed to be a collider, otherwise no collider logic would happen. That is indeed false, and they can both be a trigger. Anyways, now that I've cleared that up, we want to go add component and create an Udon behavior component. I then want to create a script to go inside this component, so I'm going to come into my project window. I'm going to right click, create VRChat Udon graph program asset, and I'm going to call this lock logic. And then I just want to select my lock again and drag and drop our script into the Udon behavior component. And then I just want to open up the Udon graph. Now that we're in the graph, I want to create a simple script so that when the key enters the lock, it opens the door. So the first thing we need to do is know what animator has the bool value on it. So I'm just going to create a variable animator, and I'm just going to call it anim for short. Then I just want to hit this drop down menu and make it public so we're able to select it inside the inspector. Then I just want to drag and drop this into my scene. I want to put it into an animator set bool node, as our parameter is a bool. I want to change this to string, and I'm just going to plug my animator into it. So now whenever this node is called, it will tell this animator to find the variable of this name and change its value to be this value. So we need to give it its name, so I'm just going to come down here and just copy and paste as it is keying sensitive. And we want to make it so is open equals true, so I'm going to hit this little checkbox and make the value equal true. So now whenever this node is called, it will tell this animator to find this bool value and make this value equal true, which in turn will tell this animator to transition from the door closed animation to the door open. So now we just need to say when we want this node to be called. I'm just going to create an onTriggerEnter and plug that into our setBool node. So now this isn't perfect, as it does have a slight problem where we're not checking to see what object has entered the trigger. So I want to make sure that it's actually a key that has entered the lock instead of a torch or a different type of key, aka a red key instead of a green key. So using this node, I'm just going to grab from the collider. I'm going to go collider get game object, and this will get the game object that has entered the trigger. I then want to use game object get name, and this will get the name of the object that has entered the trigger. I then want to make sure that this game object has the correct name. However, I don't actually want to check the exact name of the key, because you might want to have like multiple green keys in the scene to make it easier for people to find them or to make them more consumable and to allow for a more dynamic way of getting around the map. So instead, I just want to make sure that it has the name green key in it instead of making sure that it's that exact key that is in the lock. However, I want to make this dynamic so I can reuse the script in different places. So I'm going to come up to my variables tab and just create a string and call this key name. And I'm just going to make this public, so we'll be able to change the name of the key that we're looking for inside the Udon behavior script. So I'm just going to drag and drop this into my scene, and I'm going to put this into a string contains node. I'm going to put the name of the game object that just entered the lock, and then I'm going to put the key name into the value slot. So now this will give us a bool value. I just want to put that into a branch node, so I'm just going to go and create a branch node, and I'm just going to make it so that only when the bool equals true will it play our setBool node. So now in summary, when an object enters the lock, it will check to see whether or not its game object's name contains the name of the key that we want to open the door. If it does contain this in its name, it will come to this branch node and equal true, which will make it set this animator's isOpenBool to equal true, which in turn will open our door. Awesome, so I'm just going to come up here and hit compile, and then come back into our scene view. I'm then going to select my green lock, and down here we can see we've got two public variables that we need to enter in. So first of all, it needs to know the animator that contains this is open bool. So I'm just going to drag the door manager object into the anim slot, as that's where the animator is currently stored. And for a key name, I'm just going to type in key, as that's what green key currently contains. It is cane sensitive, so just be careful on that. Now that we have this set up, it's time to playtest. So I'm just going to hit play to playtest this. I'm playtesting this with SignEmu, by the way, which allows me to play it inside the inspector. If you're using the companion app, you'll have client sim, which is the later version of it. Awesome, so now that we're in the scene, I can close this menu and pick up our key, and we can put that into the lock, and it should open the door. However, if I was to manually close this door again and select our red key, we can see that it also opens the door. This may be desirable, or maybe not. If I was to manually close the door again and just change its variable, and instead of just checking for key, I'm going to come up to green key, and I'm just going to copy its name and then paste that into green lock. And now when I playtest, we can see that the red key won't open the door because it has red key instead of green key. But if I select my green key and put that into the door, we can see that it opens. And just as a good sanity check, we can come over and grab this torch over here, and when we put that into the door, we can see that it doesn't open. However, if we change this variable to be literally nothing, we should see that it now opens the door, which probably isn't what you want. Awesome! Okay, so now that we've got all this working, you may have noticed that when we open the lock, we still have the key and can walk inside with the key, meaning that we could open up many more locks. What if we instead wanted to make it so that when you put the key into the lock, it can only open that door and you can't use the same key for multiple locks as you would like a key card? This feature is especially useful in puzzle games, and so how would we implement that into Udon? Well, if we come back to the Udon graph, there is one easy method of doing this. I'm simply going to just copy everything that we have here and paste it down here, and then instead of onTriggerEnter, I'm going to use onTriggerExit, and this event will play whenever an object leaves the trigger. And so if I set bool to equal false, when one of our keys enters the trigger, it will open the door, and when one of our keys leaves the door, it will close the door. However, there is a slight problem with this script. Currently, when you select the key and put it into the lock, it should open, but when you take it out, it will close the door, which is what we want. However, if I was to put one key into the lock, and my red key currently works, so I'm going to put that into the lock as well, and then if I was to take out the green key, we can see that it closes the door, and that, just to check, yeah, the red key does actually open and close the door. So, now this isn't desirable, but most players will probably get around it, but there is a pretty easy fix for this. In our graph, we just want to count how many objects has entered the trigger. So to do that, I'm just going to create an int variable, and I'm just going to call this counter. And I'm just going to drag and drop this into my scene while holding control to get a node that will set this value. Then I just want to create an int addition node, and I want to grab our counter again and plug that into the int slot. And I just want to add 1 to this int. So now whenever a key enters the lock, and we've checked that it is indeed a key, we're going to add 1 to this counter value before telling the door to open. Then I'm just going to copy this and paste this down here. I'm going to add -1 instead of creating a subtraction node because I can't be bothered adding it in. And then I just want to check to make sure that this counter value is equal to or less than 0, as this will mean that there is no longer any keys inside the lock. So if I just put that into a branch node and plug our set bool after that node and just do a little bit of cleanup. Now whenever a key enters the trigger, it will add 1 to our counter before opening the door. And when a key exits the trigger, it will check to see whether or not that was the last key that enters the trigger before telling the door to close. So if I was to hit compile and playtest this, we can now see that whenever I put my key into the lock, it opens the door. And if I was to select my second key and put that into the lock, it remains open. But if I was to take the first key out, the door remains open. It's only when I take out the red key that it closes the door. So now we've got this method working. However, what if we wanted the key to be consumable? So if you realize that you could have used the key somewhere else, you were unable to take the key out of the lock as it has already been used to open this door. So how do we go about doing so? Well, if we were to stop playtesting, the first thing I'm going to do is just revert our code to the way it was before. So now that I've done this, I just want to come back into my scene view and we're going to make some changes. So in order to give the illusion of the key being used, I actually want to create 2 keys. So in order to make this work, I'm going to make it so that when you put the key into the lock, it disables the key that you're currently holding and then displays a second key that gets inserted into the lock and opens the door. So to do that, I'm going to select my second key and I'm just going to duplicate that. I'm going to make it a child of the green lock. And as I want to animate this key, I'm going to make it a child of door manager, so we're able to include it in the door open animation. So I'm just going to select my key and delete its grip variable that I just used to tell the pickup script how I want the key to be held. I just want to come into our duplicate green key, and I want to delete its collider pickup script and rigid body, as well as object sync. And I just want to reset its position to be more in line with our lock. So I'm just going to hit F to relocate us, and I'm going to put it in its starting position. Now I just want to animate this, so I'm going to come into our animation tab, and I'm going to make sure that door open is selected. And I just want to animate our key entering the lock, being turned, and then the door opening. So I'm just going to fine tune the location of this key. I'm then going to hit the record button. I'm just going to drag and drop the door open all the way to the 1 second mark. And now I just want to give the key a little wiggle at this location. I want to give it, say, 20 seconds to enter the lock. Now that the key is inserted, I just want to switch to the rotate mode. And I just want to give it a quick wiggle to lock in its location as it is right now. And then I want to make it fully rotate a single revolution before the door then opens. So if I was just to playtest this and have a look, we can see that the key enters, it rotates, and then the door opens. Awesome! So I actually want to make that happen just a little bit quicker when it comes to the rotation. And I also want to make the door open when the key is nearing its completion. So I'm going to select my door nodes and just drag and drop them through. Obviously, you can have the animation however you like, so feel free to fine tune this to better match your scene. So here's my final animation, and I think that looks pretty good. So now that we have our animation looking pretty good, we just need to add a disable and enable for our secondary key. So with the record button still playing, at the beginning of this animation, I'm just going to toggle on the red key, and then a little bit later, I'm going to give it a second node just to be sure. And now I just want to come into door close, and when the door close animation happens, we don't want the key to be there. So I just want to hit the record button, and then just make sure that the key doesn't exist. So now if I was to hit play, just so we can test out our animations, we can see that when the door open animation plays, the key goes in and the door opens, and when the door closed animation plays, the key is no longer there. Awesome! So now we just need to add our Udon logic. So I'm just going to stop playtesting. I'm going to select our lock, and I'm going to open up our graph. So now when the key enters the lock, we want to disable the key object so that we can then show the secondary key and give the illusion that the key has been inserted into the lock. Now the easy way to do this would just be to grab our game object key and use a simple game object set active, and this will disable the key in a convincing manner. However, the problem is, if we wanted to make this synced, if you disable the game object key, the VRChat object sync will no longer keep updating the position of the key, and therefore players won't actually see the key into the lock, and therefore it just will ruin the syncing. So while this would work if you don't want your key to be synced with other players, it doesn't quite work for what we're trying to do here. So instead of actually disabling the object itself, we just want to disable its collider so we can no longer pick it up, and we want to disable its mesh renderer so we can no longer see that the key is actually still there. So to do that, I'm actually going to use a game object get component node to grab a component from our game object. I'm going to change it from string to type, as this is easier. And I'm going to grab the type mesh renderer, and then I'm going to duplicate this node down here and get the type collider. So now whenever these nodes are called, it will grab the mesh renderer from our game object, and this one will grab the collider from our game object. Now do be aware that your script will crash if they don't contain the collider and mesh renderer, but in our case, if you already had a pickup script on it, this shouldn't be a problem. So I'm just going to drag and drop our game object variable into these slots, as we want to use the game object of the key that entered our collider instead of the lock itself. Otherwise, we're just making the lock invisible. And now we just want to disable these two components. So I'm going to put this mesh renderer into a mesh renderer set enable node. And using this node, I'm just going to set its enabled state to be false. I'm then going to use a collider set enable node to also disable the collider on our key. So now if I was just to rearrange this, in a way that still kind of looks like spaghetti code, we should now be able to disable the mesh renderer and collider on our key. So in summary, it will check to see whether or not it is actually a key itself, before it will grab that game object's mesh renderer and collider and tell those to be false, and then it will tell it to open up the door. So now whenever we put this key into the lock, it will grab our lock and play the animation. However, we currently have a key stealer. If you were to put a second key into this lock, it will also take that key and also open the door and completely ruin your game. So we just want to make sure that if you've already put a key into the lock, it doesn't continue accepting keys. The simple way I'm going to do this is just disable the trigger on this lock to make sure that this onTrigger node can no longer play, and therefore it can no longer steal keys. So I'm just going to duplicate these nodes here, as this is exactly what we need, and as we don't have anything plugged into the instance slot, it will default to this game object. So now when it checks to see whether or not it's actually a key that is entered the lock, it will toggle off its mesh renderer and mesh collider of the key. It will then tell the door to open, and then it'll disable the collider on this trigger to make sure that no other keys can be inserted into this lock, and therefore no other keys will be used up in opening this door. So now that we've got all this set up, this should work, right? Well, not exactly. If I was to playtest this code, we can see that when we pick up the green key and put it into the lock, we can see that the door opens, which is as we expect. And it looks really good with the key going in and turning the lock, despite the fact that it's actually a secondary key. But that's actually where the glitch is. Despite the fact that it looks like we've disabled the key, we were actually unable to pick up another object, like this red key over here. This is because we're still technically holding the object. If I was to select our green key, obviously the mesh renderer and box collider are deselected, but the pickup script is still functional. We haven't actually dropped the game object. If I was to right click to drop the game object, I'd then be able to pick up another object. Now this might not actually be a problem with how you've set up your scene, but as I've set my keys to auto hold, this is a problem actually only for desktop players, but that's still a big portion of the VRChat community. So how would I account for this problem? Well, if I was to stop playtesting and come back into the Udon graph, I simply need to tell the pickup script to drop the game object. So using the same as we did for the get component, I'm just going to grab our get component and duplicate it. I'm then going to put a VRC type into this, to which all the VRChat exclusive ones are put in a different location. And I simply want to grab a type VRC pickup and plug that into the type slot. And then I'm just going to drag and drop my game object in here. And now that we have access to the pickup script, we just need to tell that pickup script to drop the object. So I'm going to put that into a pickup drop node and simply plug it in before we open the door. So now the key should be dropped when we put it into the lock. So if we compile that and playtest it, we can see that whenever we grab our green key and put it into the lock, it opens the door, and I can immediately pick up another key. And if I was to put the second key into the lock, it doesn't get consumed as well. However, my door lock still has the key name just being key, so the red key should work. So if I was to playtest this again, and if I was to come and put my red key into the lock, we can see that it shows a green key opening the door, as this is technically just an optical illusion. You will have to account for this into your scene, but it also means that you can do weird things like make the key a bit smaller so it fits the slot better, and other things like that. And now just to be safe, if I was to build and test this with 2 players just to make sure the networking works, do remember to come up to settings and show extra options on build page and account page so you can build last build to get the second player in, just to get around easy anti-cheat. We can now see that when one player picks up the key and plugs it into the lock, it opens for both players. Awesome! So hopefully you found this video helpful. Sorry for my voice being a little croaky, I've been pretty sick recently. But feel free to leave a like on the video if you liked it, leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and feel free to check out some of my other tutorials that I have on the channel. But until next time, bye!